in the lives of people. Just as you feel led to be involved with that, please jump in with those families that are left. So take that with you when you leave. And then last week when you left, we gave out our devotion books for the month of December, Radiant Dawn. So this starts today, December the 1st. I read mine this morning. Very fitting, goes right along similar to what we're talking about this morning, or at least one part of it does. And so if you didn't pick one up last week, there's some more outside when you leave in the foyer. All right, so Isaiah chapter 9 is where we're going to be this morning. We're starting our Christmas series. May look a little different than what we've done in the past during Christmas. But one of the things that we know about Christmas time, the month of December, is that there are Christmas traditions, right? Everybody in this room probably has some type of Christmas tradition. I know if you've been here before, usually in my life growing up with my mom and dad, it wasn't really Christmas at our house until you're decorating the tree and Elvis Presley is singing "I'll Have a Blue Christmas" on a record, if you even know what that is, okay? And so that was my life growing up. And then, we would go to my grandfather's farm, and that was just part of the tradition that we had. And everybody has a tradition. Tradition some of you started this week of pulling down decorations out of the attic, starting to put lights on your house. Some of you are starting to put different things around the house and just getting ready for Christmas. I know if you're like myself, it's flown by, right? I mean, it's already December 1st, and you're going, my goodness, it's already here. And then you think, I'm not prepared. Well, join the crowd, all right? So when you think about these Christmas traditions, we all have them. And everybody has a certain story. You have a certain way that you celebrate Christmas. And for some people during this time, it becomes particularly hard. Maybe you've had a really tough year. Maybe you've lost a loved one in the past year or more, and you're just remembering and things, and it just becomes very, very hard for people. Well, I want you to think about this. Really what we're going to start looking at is there is one thing I don't think any of us will really argue in this world, and that is this, is that there's a lot of darkness in our world, isn't there? Isn't there a lot of darkness? I mean, you think about what is darkness. I mean, you think about the evil in the world, the darkness of just where our whole life is around. And in the midst of darkness, what we're going to see over the next several weeks is Christ comes. And in the midst of darkness, and that's what Isaiah describes the world at the time, is that the light of Christ comes. And that's what I really want us to focus on over these next few weeks is how do we respond to that? I ran across a little book about 3 or 4 weeks ago talking about this idea of how we approach darkness is really sometimes the same way that we approach Christmas. And I thought, man, that's a good analogy because we all approach Christmas in different ways. Some of you in this room right now, you're super excited about Christmas. Some of you are not. Some people, we're not going to ask you to raise your hands, right? But you understand what I mean. Some of us are overwhelmed by it. Some of us are super excited for it. Some of you are Clark Griswold and you put too many lights on your house, right? And you blow breakers and you have to call electricians and think you need more electricity, right? I mean, there's things of that nature. Right? You just have all sorts of things that come into your life when you think about Christmas. But the way that we approach the darkness of the world is somewhat similar to the way Christmas is approached by people. And what I want to look at this morning is, first of all, you don't have to look far really to notice darkness. In America today, there are over 653 million, think about this, just homeless people in America. Can you imagine? Think about that. You think about today, there are over 5 million people today worldwide that are involved in some kind of modern day slavery worldwide. 12 million of those 49 million people are children. That's dark, isn't it? I mean, that's the darkness, the evil of the world. And all of this is around us. And Isaiah talks about his darkness. You think about homicides. Just in Atlanta, there are over 100 current homicide cases, investigations, just in the city of Atlanta. So just the thing goes on. Abortion numbers continue to rise. Drug use, abuse, things of that nature. All of this is darkness. And so the question for us is, how do you approach the darkness? And we're going to equate that to some of the same things that are happening around Christmas. And we're going to pull this together because I think sometimes we either just forget that it's there, or we tend to say, oh, the world's just bad, which is what we're going to see this morning. The world's just bad, so, oh, well, it's just bad. And so I'm going to be upset about it, I'm going to be mad about it, I'm going to be Scrooge about it, which is what we're going to see this morning. I'm going to be that way. Or you're going to say, oh, I just embrace kind of the Santa factor of Christmas, the shoppings of Christmas, that if we just go through life, we can cover up that by serving ourselves. Or we can have the Santa Christmas where we just kind of ignore that it's even there and say, ho, 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 right? Or we come to the realization of who and what Christmas is all about. And what do we do with this? Because even as Christians, even though you are blessed beyond anything in the world, no matter what we have or don't have, compared to the world, here in America, we have way more than most people in the world. No matter what level of income you have or don't have, we have way more than the rest of the world. So when you think about, what the darkness and what's there and what's happening and everything around us, how do we respond to it? Because even as Christians, that we have Christ in our life, we can become critical. We can become a little bit of a Scrooge type factor of just like, oh, well, that's just the way the world is. So let's embrace it. And so what we're going to look at this morning in the book of Isaiah is, here's a prophet 700 years before the birth of Christ. Okay? 700 years before Christ comes, the prophet Isaiah is speaking to the nation of Israel, and he's giving them some prophetic word, and he's telling them about this Prince of Peace that's going to come. 700 years before. You talk about waiting for something, all right? 700 years, they had already been introduced to the Messiah, but you think about at this point, 700 years, they're waiting for the Messiah. A lot of them didn't make it till the Messiah at this point, right? But here's what I want you to see, is that in this world, in the midst of what Isaiah was living through, in the midst of what God gave him to the world, he gave the message to them, he gives them a few words. So here's what I want us to look at. Look at verse 1. He said, nevertheless, the gloom of the distressed land will not be like that of former time when he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will bring honor to the way of the sea and to the land to the east and to the Jordan, to Galilee of the nations. Now look at verse 2. Look at how he describes it. The people walking, look what he says, in what? Darkness have seen a great light. A light has dawned of those living in the land of the darkness. You have enlarged the nations and increased its joy. People have rejoiced before you, and they rejoice at harvest time. And as they rejoice, it says, with dividing spoils, he says, for you have shattered their oppressive yoke and the rod on their shoulders, the staff of their oppressor, just as you did in the day of Midian, on the day of Midian. Look what he says, for every trampling boot of battle and the bloodshed garment of war, he says, will be burned as fuel for the fire. Then, verse 6 says this, for a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and he will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. All through Christmas traditions, Christmas hymns, Young Handel's Messiah, just goes on and on and on. All sorts of things remind us of darkness and light, doesn't it? And he describes the world around him at that time, same as today. People walking in darkness have seen a great light. The light has dawned. And then once again, on those living in the land of darkness. So he uses that word twice, living in the land of darkness, walking in the darkness. That is where you and I walk. And as Christ followers, what is our duty? What is our job? What is our responsibility? Is to shine the light in it. In our book, Radiant Dawn, the very first thing he gives today, and he says this right at the very first of day one. He says, "O radiant dawn, splendor of eternal light, Son of justice, come, shine on those who dwell in the darkness and in the shadow of death." So he's saying, shine the light. This fits right along with what we're talking about. He's saying, shine the light in the midst of those, helping us to see who and what we need to do. So how do you handle darkness? That's what we're going to look at. The first one that we're going to look at is, because all of us have favorite movies, right? Everybody's seen A Christmas Carol for the most part. Some version of it. A black and white version, right? Or you've seen all the way to the new, you've seen the cartoon version of The Christmas Carol. And there's this guy named Scrooge, right? And what is his thing? What does he say? Thank you. All right, bah humbug, right? This guy, if you follow the story, though, he has a rough childhood. And he's just mad at the world. He thinks the more money I conquer, the more stingy I become. Like, I'm just going to look out for myself. And so we know the story that unfolds. Matter of fact, I was reading this week. He says, it's an allegory of the Christmas Carol. Scrooge is the very antithesis of the Christmas spirit, symbolizing selfishness and apathy. And his character serves as a vehicle by which Dickens is able to critique the more general and no less cruel upper class at that time. So he was just saying, he was pointing it out. So this was his way of kind of going at culture to remind them of what's important. So when you think about Scrooge and the darkness, and what we talk about as Christians is this, that Scrooge, what we're looking at, would say, yes, darkness is all around. It will always be. So let's just act accordingly. Who cares? Let's just go through life. Let's not make a difference in this world. Let's not do that. Because we can become so cynical in our lives. So if you think about it, Ebenezer Scrooge, this fictional character, cold-hearted, despises Christmas, but his redemption comes from the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas yet to come. And then it becomes a tale of him just walking through this and seeing, and Dickens describes Scrooge as a cold within him, a frozen, he says, of his old features. He says, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheeks, stiffened at his gait. And he says his eyes were red, his lips were blue, and he spoke out shrewdly with a voice. And he was always angry. Matter of fact, he said this, if you remember this from the book or the movie, he says, if I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with a Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and burned with a stake of holly through his heart. That sounds like a fun guy. Wonder how many of us, even as a Christian, will have that coldness in our heart toward other people. Well, it's just the way it is. This is just what's happening around us. So, how do you approach the darkness? If you're like me, sometimes in our lives, we can be very overwhelmed, can't we? Sometimes we think, you know what? The task is too big. The task is too much. Every week we pray for a persecuted church, group of people. We pray for a unreached people group of the world. Why do we do that? You know why we do that? To remind us of what's important. What's important is that people hear the gospel. What's important is that it's our responsibility to help fulfill the Great Commission. It's our responsibility to make sure that we are a part of that reaching the unreached people group. However that is for us to go and be a part of changing the world as Christ came. So in the middle of the darkness, as he says, people walking in darkness have seen a great light. The light dawned on the living in the land of darkness, on those living in the land of darkness. Here's what we need to understand. We are living still in the midst of darkness. How do we respond? Well, we definitely don't want to respond like Scrooge. We definitely don't want to be the person who is cynical, the person who is hard-hearted toward the things around us. But just remembering that there is a task to be done. There is a mission to be done. That is the Great Commission. So the way he approaches it and the way we would think about it is that darkness is around us, so, well, it's always going to be so. It's always going to be that way. So we'll just ignore it. And we'll actually just embrace it a little bit, and we'll even participate in it. So if you're ever at that place where you're just like, I don't know what to do, because I can tell you, there are times, even this week, there are just some things going on in my mind. And even this morning, things just going on in my mind where you're going, man, distractions happen from what God's called you to do. Distractions happen from what God has given us the opportunity to do. Because this is what I want to remind everybody. You and I both have mission fields. Your mission field is where you live. Your mission field is where you work. Your mission field is where you play. Because I know you like to play, right? We all like to do something. We all enjoy things. And the question is, how do we shine the light in the midst of those and not become the Scrooge type of Christian that says, you know what, I'm just going to focus on myself. I'm just going to be selfish. I'm just going to take care of me, myself, and everything's going to be okay. You know what I've noticed in life is every time that I step out and go, I'm just going to take care of myself, I'm more miserable than I was. Anybody ever been there? If you get to that place where you go, I'm just going to do what I want to do, and that selfishness sets in. Well, you go down and he talks about the darkness, gives us some more things, and then he comes to that famous verse that you have probably sent out Christmas cards with this verse on it. For unto us a child will be born, a son will be given. So he's not just a child, he's the Son of God, who we know, as John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave his Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. Like, that's the most important thing. So he's pointing out 700 years before the Messiah comes, 700 years before that baby Jesus was born in a manger, he said, a child will be born to us, a son will be given. So it's not just anybody, it's a son. He's talking about the deity of Christ and who God is. And he said the government will be upon his shoulders, and he will be named what? Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. Those are things that you need in your life from Christ. He is that wonderful Counselor. So in the midst of all of that, he brings forward and says, a son is coming. The Messiah is coming. So if you find yourself in this back and forth teetering between what kind of a Scrooged Christian would be, because let me tell you, we can get there, can't we? Oh, well, nobody else is doing anything. I'm not going to do anything either, right? Nobody else is, it's just those type things. Those attitudes come along. The first thing we need to do to kind of move out of this, and we'll see this over and over again as we walk through this. The first thing is this: we have to always take the focus off of ourselves. What does he say here? The darkness is there. He said, but know this, the sun is coming. We've got to take the focus off of ourselves. That's why Jesus said, if you want to know what it means to follow me, deny yourself. Die to yourself. That's the first thing. We've got to move the focus off of ourselves. How many of you this week have struggled with that. Think about that. Where you're just focused on yourself. And every time you focus on yourself, you know what happens? You become a little bit more irritable. I'm not going to ask anybody here to raise your hand. But did somebody in your household this Thanksgiving week get a little irritable? Anybody? In the midst of wanting to get everything ready and get everything perfect, and you become a little bit irritable. Have you ever noticed this? The people that you love the most are the people you hurt the most. Those are the people you just check the filter off. Isn't that right? Shame on us, right? Because we're all guilty of that. But he says here, what we're looking at here is we want to move away from that. We have to take the focus off ourselves and put the focus on others. That's number one. And the second thing I want to encourage you as we go through this Christmas time is to just remember to pause. Does that make sense? Just remember to slow down enough and hit the pause button and reflect. But you've got to stop. You've got to slow down. You've got to pause. That's why we're giving everybody one of these who, when you leave, this is 25 days starting today. You can do this by yourself. You can do it with your family like we'll be doing. But it's just a way to just reflect and not let this Christmas season go by and not really reflect on who Christ is. You have to, first of all, pause. You've got to slow down long enough to see